Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 17th chapter. And pretty much, as you see in the subheading, prophecy about Damascus. So here, as we went through the 15th and 16th chapter, which was dealing with the Lord pronouncing judgment against Moab. Now in 17, we sort of return back to the focal point here of, as we saw in the first few chapters, Israel and Damascus. Okay, and starting in particularly with the northern kingdom. So this is Isaiah 17:1. The burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Now keep in mind that at this time, the main foe or adversary that would be used to do these things or to victimize these targets of the Lord used the Assyrians, all right, which he mentioned, or we read in the previous chapter, how the Lord mentioned, right, via the mouth of Isaiah, that he is using the Assyrians as a tool, but in the minds of the Assyrians, they don't even realize that. So as it says here, it's taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap, which is to say that it's going to be taken over and broken down. Verse 12, the cities of Aroer are forsaken. They shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. So you have cases where, like, people are fleeing, all right, but also you have this destruction, right? When a foreign nation comes in and they're raging through the city, one, they're taking away captives, right? People are fleeing out of the city, and it's being left and made destitute, right? So as a result, that's why you have the imagery of flocks lying down and none making them afraid, right? So you have pretty much it's so open space that as the trees and stuff start to grow, these flocks can go and graze there, and there's nobody to move them away because everybody or most people have fled away. Verse 3, the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, right? So their defenses, because that's what a fortress is, it's a defense, but that's going to cease, right? So one, in the northern kingdom's alliance with Damascus, that wouldn't do them any that wouldn't benefit them in this case. But the Lord was going to strip away their defense by allowing the Assyrians to prevail against them, right? And we know through secular history that happened through a siege, right? Which after about 2 to 3 years, the Assyrians were able to prevail and take over the mainly starting with the capital, Samaria. And it mentions here the kingdom from Damascus and the remnant of Syria. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. And what that means is they're going to diminish, right? They're going to be brought down, because at this point the glory of Israel was being brought low, as the next verse is going to expound upon. Verse 4, and in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean, right? So at one point, when we followed the ways of Yahweh Ba'asham Yahushai, he glorified us, right? One example is during the time of King Solomon. So the nations were subject unto us. We had riches. Our economy was flourishing. Everything was pretty much going good, right? Other nations were looking at Israel as the top place. But when Israel started to go into the way of these idols and forsake the Lord, he took that away. Now you have civil war, you have infighting, you have lawlessness, and that's bringing down the level of the nation more and more and more, to the point where they're so unfit, to where now they're being taken over and sent as captives. So at one point, those that were so glorious that people of other nations would come there, and like the Queen of Sheba fainting for like the amazement of glory, are now being taken away in shackles, right? Carried captive to a foreign nation. So that is sort of the the imagery of like the glory being made thin, right? And the fat of his flesh shall wax lean. So the fat of your flesh basically meaning like you're eating good, right? You're healthy, you're in good state. Waxing lean is in the literal sense, you have like lack of food, right? When people are starving or there's a famine or they're not really eating right, which on a metaphorical level it represents having less, right? Verse 5, and it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn and reapeth the ears with his arm. And it shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim. And what this means is by them waxing lean and suffering the consequence of being taken over by the Assyrians. And when I say taken over, I mean they weren't taken over to be made tributes. They were just like, taken over and sent as captives. So Isaiah is saying here, the land is going to look like after a harvest, right? After the harvestmen have gathered the corn and reaped the ears, right? During the harvest time, what's left, how that field looks plain, that's what it's going to look like. And you can imagine the people here being the harvest or the crops that are being gathered, leaving the land bare. And it shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim, right? Same thing, same concept here. Verse 6, now we know that after they were taken out, heathens were put in the land. But in the process of them being taken out, you see the visual of a land that was once fruitful and full of the glory of the Lord and Israel is now looks like a messed up wasteland. Verse 6, yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it as the shaking of an olive tree, or 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bowl. So the Lord is saying here, though the majority of you are going to suffer this, not everybody's going to be taken out, right? And so you still had remnants that were left in the land. Like how when you shake an olive tree, you may have a lot of olives fall off, but not every single one is going to fall off, right? There's always those small clusters or 1, 2, or 3 up there that are able to hold on and stay on there. That's why it's given this visual, right? Like 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bowl, or 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord of hosts. And similarly, right, we see that Ezra also mentioned something similar when it comes to this time, right, in 2nd Ezra 16, how it says that they're going to search the houses with the sword, right? There shall be 2 or 3 left. So just like the Lord brought destruction and desolation back then to where it was only a few people left, that same visual is likened on to now, which calls to mind, right, that severity of the destruction that is going to happen in this time as well. Like that's where you get your I Am Legend visuals, and so on. And you notice most in like The Division or The Last of Us or I Am Legend or the Book of Eli, you don't really see people all out in the open a lot like that. Like today, everywhere you go, almost at any time of the day, you're going to see people. And you go downtown, you're definitely going to see people. But in those movies and in that setting, you don't really see a lot of people out like that, right? It's only a few, and most of them are in hiding and only come out when they need to be or when it's safe. Verse 7, at that day shall a man look to his maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. And it's similar to how the Lord co-signs his judgment when he says, then, they shall know me, right? They shall know the Lord and how he is known in his judgments. Because now when this destruction comes upon them, they're going to have no option but to acknowledge, right? And turn to try and seek the Lord. And it says that also in, was it Proverbs? They shall seek me early, right? In their affliction, they shall remember me, roughly paraphrasing. And you saw like a similar example of this during the CV times, right? During the CV times, you had people that were now saying, "Oh, let's turn to prayer. Oh, let's all come together. Let's pray to whatever God you believe in to try and deliver us." That's what happens when trouble comes, right? When trouble comes, people all of a sudden now become holy because instinctively in the back of their mind, they know that there is a higher power. But here specifically, Isaiah is saying like this is what it's going to take for Israel to now basically turn to seek help from the Most High rather than their idols, because now they see those idols are not going to do them any good. Verse 8, and he shall not look to the idols, the work of his hands, neither shall respect that which his fingers have made, either the groves or the images. See, so given that reverence and worshiping these idols is they're going to realize that it's all folly. King David says something similar, right? When he mentioned how he beat the heathen and they cried onto their gods, they cried even onto the Most High, and none did answer, and then he beat them as the dust, right, of the ground. That it's showing you that these heathens, in their minds, they have their gods that they serve. However, in such a desperate situation they were in, they cried even onto the God of Israel. So when all hell breaks loose, when calamity comes, people start off with what they're accustomed to, but eventually they realize this is not working. We need something else. Let's try anything. But in this case, Isaiah is saying, like, you're going to realize your idols, your altars and you know, all that idolatry is not working. And it was never working, right? It was always the Most High at the end of the day. Verse 9, in that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bow and an uppermost branch, which they left because of the children of Israel, and there shall be desolation. So once again, going into like the bareness, right, of the city. And here, when you look in like even other translations, like they give reference here to the time when the Lord had the Canaanites, you could say, flee right before Israel as he led Israel via Moses and Joshua to conquer the land, right? So just that's that comparison to say, like, just like how, you know, you had the cities abandoned, you know, as they were being destroyed and taken over by Israel during that time. You know, it's going to look like that when the Lord brings this adversary against Israel. Verse 10, because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength. See, and that's the Most High. Because they were so busy worshiping these idols. Therefore shalt thou plant pleasant plants and shall set it with strange lips. Right? So here Isaiah is saying, as a result of you not following the ways of the Lord, not being mindful of the Heavenly Father, right, the God of Israel, you are now planting pleasant plants and setting it with strange slips. Now, a slip, when you look it up, is like a when you cut a plant and replant it somewhere else. So rather than having to plant it via the seed, you can actually cut the plant and replant it somewhere else, right? So if we look here, slip in, I don't know, say plants. Right, it says here, in plant, slips refer to cuttings or pieces of a plant that can be propagated. And what I described is the process of propagation when you're dealing with plants to create new plants. This is a form of asexual reproduction where a new plant develops from a part of the parent plant rather than seeds. Slips can be stem cuttings, leaf cuttings, or side shoots, depending on the plant species. So if we go to, let me see if they have here, slips and plants, let's see, and propagation. Yeah, in plant propagation, slips are used. Okay. Yeah, it says this method is particularly common in plants like pineapples, where slips are side shoots or fruits with large crowns growing from the pineapple. Cool. Yeah, so you pretty much get the gist of it. I was hoping they would give us the direct example of propagation, but you get the gist of it, right? It's a way of planting, right? And so here the strange slips, right, are, the word goes into like foreign. So this was basically Israel planting with pleasant plants plus the strange slips, which would be plants of like the heathen, And the manifestation of this was like them forming alliances with heathen nations, sometimes even with the Assyrians. Here we're seeing with the Syrians, right, Damascus, and not just that, but also their customs and idols worship and stuff that they adopted from these nations. But particularly here, right, they had a heavy, habit of those political alliances rather than depending on the Lord. So this mingling here, when you see, as it says, it leading into verse 11, in that day shalt thou make thy plants to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish, right? So you're going to plant it, you're going to water it, it's going to flourish, but the harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and of desperate sorrow. So the result of this, when you go to harvest, is not going to be a pleasant and fruitful harvest. It's going to be, negative. And that's what we see here, right? By them going in this path and allying themselves with the heathen and mingling themselves, like planting with pleasant plants and those strange slips. Yeah, they did it. They nurtured it. They continued in that for a while, but the result was not to their benefit. Now in the last few verses here, similar to this pattern that we see, not just with Isaiah, but even with the other prophets, right? Even with Hosea and Amos, we see this pattern where there's mention of judgment against Israel, judgment against these other nations, but there's always this balance of the Lord still then judging those nations for harming Israel, or the Lord still at the end delivering or protecting or turning back Israel from that trouble. So that's what we see here in verse 12, right? Woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the seas, right? Which is like the sounding of an army. And to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them. And they shall flee far off and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind. And chaff is like the remains of the crops, right? You get your crops, you thresh it, you get the grains and the essential part out of it. The chaff is the husk. And that, like it's saying, they're going to be blown away so easily, like the chaff on the top of mountains when the wind blows, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind, right? So you can imagine here, see what they have. But one visual that comes to mind with the rolling thing, is a tumbleweed. Verse 14, and behold, at eventide, trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. See, so this applies back then to the Assyrians, and it applies really to the nation, all the nations that came against Israel and would come against Israel, right? So this is the sort of treatment or the mindset or the judgment that the Lord has destined. Though he used them to come against us, he would still turn around and judge them, right? And so that's an example here, which he ended up even doing with the Assyrians, right? They ended up getting their judgment not too long after. So that brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 17th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.